Western culture typically has prized reason and logic over any other kind of way that our brain might work. Reason and logic were everything. Going all the way back to Plato. Plato had this idea that he wrote about quite extensively where he said the brain is like this chariot and it's got two horses, and one of the horses is very well behaved and the other horse is wild and passionate and has to be reined in. And in fact, the charioteer is reason, trying to hold that wild horse in check so that the good horse can lead the chariot down the road. Well, fast forward to the Renaissance, and people in the Renaissance had exactly the same idea about logic and about the use of reason. You remember René Descartes, probably you've heard about him. He's the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." Well, Descartes and his other Renaissance peers also thought that reason and logic were what it's all about. They went so far as to say that anything that wasn't logic, in other words, if it was instinctive or emotional, it was just crude and primitive, and we ought to stamp out all that stuff. Well, that thought persisted until we got into the American Revolution time, and Thomas Jefferson himself wrote something that you've probably read. Jefferson wrote that man can be governed by reason and reason alone. And then we get into the 20th century, and we've got Freud saying that we've got to control this terrible bad id with the ego, because the ego is reason, and we've got to tamp out that passionate id. Well, that thought, I think, still exists very much today. We haven't gotten away from that yet. We still think that logic reigns supreme. I mean, just look at the words that we use with one another. We say things like, hey, calm down. We say things like, get reasonable. We say things like, get a grip, right? Those are all pleas to be more logical. So we still kind of think there's this bias. In fact, I think there still is quite a bias about this logical thinking that we have to use. And it's so strong, that bias about logic is so strong that I was actually afraid to name this presentation what I really wanted to name this presentation today, because I was afraid quite a few of you probably wouldn't want to come. Right? You wouldn't have been here, right? Okay. Well, I didn't name it that, and it's kind of a joke, but I do have to clarify that I am going to use the word emotion today, but I'm not talking about what we usually talk about in business. When we usually talk about emotion, we usually talk about somebody getting weepy or somebody losing their temper. Yes, those are human emotions, but I'm talking more broadly about emotion as any subjective instinctive response. The whole thing about left brain, right brain, not at all true. Neuroscience knows today that all the parts of the brain work together in coordination. But different parts of the brain do have different kinds of functions. And so the point is, we have this really intelligent, conscious way of operating, and we have this also very smart, very fast, unconscious way of knowing things. So what we wind up with that, this little tongue twister here, we know some things, so we're conscious of some of the things we know, but we know other things before we know them. What it means is that we're really logical and intuitive all at the same time and all in the same brain, and it's up to us whether we choose to use that wonderful capacity that we have.